You worked for 30 years, maybe 35. You showed up, you contributed, you did everything you were supposed to do, and now at 55, something in you is just done. So you do what most people do. You log into ssa.gov, find the My Social Security tab, and there it is. A number. A monthly benefit estimate. Maybe it says $1,900. Maybe $2,400. And for a moment, it feels like permission. I used to think that number was real, that you could build a retirement plan around it, do the math, and call it a day. I was wrong about that. Because what that statement does not tell you is this. The number you're looking at assumes you will keep working, keep earning, keep paying into the system, all the way to 62 at minimum. If you walk away at 55, that estimate starts to fall apart. Not a little, sometimes by hundreds of dollars a month. The SSA doesn't lie to you. But the statement is built on an assumption that stops being true the moment you decide to stop working. And if you don't know that, you don't know what you're actually planning for. I've watched people build an entire retirement timeline around that number, then discover, years later, that the foundation was never solid to begin with. So before we talk about what to do, let's talk about what that number actually is and what it isn't. The figure on your screen right now, the one that feels like a finish line, it might be a placeholder. And if you're planning to retire at 55, you need to know the difference. Have you ever tried to map out where your income actually comes from between 55 and 62? Drop a comment. I'm curious how many people have actually done that math. So here's what's actually happening inside that SSA calculation. The Social Security Administration takes your 35 highest earning years, adjusts them for inflation, adds them up, and divides by 420 months. That result is your AIME, your average index monthly earnings. From that number, they apply a formula to calculate your base benefit. 35 years. That's the denominator. It doesn't move. If you only work 28 years by the time you retire at 55, the SSA doesn't leave those remaining 7 years blank. It fills them in with zeros. And those zeros pull your average down, every single one of them. Now, the statement you saw on ssa.gov didn't factor that in. It assumed you'd keep earning at your current salary every year until 62. That's the default. That's how the projection is built. The moment you stop working, that assumption breaks, and the number on your screen becomes something closer to fiction. This is what I mean by a phantom benefit. It's not fraud. It's a projection built on a future that no longer exists once you make your decision. There's actually a way to see your real number. Log into ssa.gov, go to the benefit estimator, and manually change your future earnings to $0. What comes back is what you're actually looking at if you retire today. Most people have never done this. Most people don't know it's an option. The SSA's formula also has something called bend points. For 2026, the formula gives you 90% of your first $1,286 in monthly earnings, 32% of everything between $1,286 and $7,749, and 15% above that. What this means in plain terms, if you're a higher earner, those 0 years hurt you more in the middle band. The drop isn't uniform. It's proportional to where your income sits in the formula. Run a quick version of this. Say you average $7,000 a month in indexed earnings across your working years. Add 7 years of zeros, and that average drops. Your AIME shrinks. Your benefit shrinks with it. We're not talking about $40 or $50 less per month. For some people in this income range, it's $200 to $400 less every month for the rest of their lives. The algorithm doesn't care how hard you worked at 28. It only asks whether you have 35 years of earnings on file. Now, some people hear this and think the answer is to delay retirement, grind out a few more years, protect the number. Maybe. But I want to be honest with you. For most people in this situation, the Social Security gap isn't what breaks the plan. It's painful, yes, but it's not the thing that drains the account. What actually does the damage is something most retirement calculators don't even put on the front page. And we're going to look at that next. So let's say the Social Security drop stings a little. Maybe $250 less per month than you expected. That's real money, and it matters. But here's what I've seen actually collapse retirement plans at 55. It's not the benefit reduction. It's the 10 years before Medicare kicks in. Medicare eligibility starts at 65. If you retire at 55, you have a decade where you are completely on your own for health insurance. No employer plan, no Medicare, just you and whatever the private market is charging that year. For a couple, both 55, retiring in 2026, the average ACA premium runs between $1,800 and $2,400 per month. That's before deductibles, before copays, before anything actually goes wrong. Run that out over 10 years. At $2,000 a month, you're looking at $240,000 just to stay insured. At $2,400, it's $288,000. That's not a retirement expense. That's a second mortgage, drawn from the same portfolio you were counting on to last 30 years. The first time I saw an actual ACA premium quote for a 55-year-old without employer coverage, I stopped and looked at it twice. It didn't feel like a health insurance bill. It felt like a housing payment. And for people who retire without a plan for this specific gap, that's exactly what it becomes. A fixed monthly drain that doesn't care what the market is doing. Now here's where it compounds. That $240,000 to $288,000 in premiums has to come from somewhere. For most people, it comes from their investment portfolio, which means you're pulling from your nest egg at an aggressive rate during your 50s, before Social Security starts, before Medicare starts, during the exact window when your portfolio needs the most breathing room. For a typical retirement portfolio, this level of withdrawal can consume 27% to 36% of your planned annual distributions, not over your entire retirement, just in that one decade. And that math doesn't include a single medical event, not a surgery, not a diagnosis, not a hospital stay. This is the trade-off that doesn't show up in the retirement brochures. People spend months obsessing over how to recover a few $100s in Social Security benefits, while a six-figure healthcare liability sits quietly in the background, unbudgeted. Retiring at 55 is not impossible, but the Medicare Gap is the variable that separates the people who make it work from the people who run out of runway in their late 60s. So if the gap is this wide and the costs are this real, what happens to your portfolio if the market decides to drop right in the middle of it? So now you have two problems running at the same time. A Social Security benefit that's lower than the statement suggested, and a decade of private health insurance, costs that most people never budgeted for. The question is, what happens to your portfolio when both of those are pulling from it at once? This is where sequence of returns risk comes in. And it's the part of early retirement math that makes financial planners genuinely nervous. The idea is straightforward. The order in which your investment returns happen matters just as much as the average return itself. If your portfolio drops 25% in year 2 of retirement, and you're still pulling $3,000 to $4,000 a month to cover living expenses and ACA premiums, you are selling shares at the worst possible time. you're locking in losses. And the shares you sold are gone. They don't recover with the market. You already spent them. Think about two people who both retire at 55 with $900,000 saved. Same average return over 10 years, same withdrawal rate, but person A hits a bear market in years 2 and 3. Person B hits the same bear market in years 8 and 9. Person A can run out of money a decade before person B. Same portfolio, same returns, different sequence. I don't have a crystal ball on when the next market downturn hits, or what your personal health situation will look like at 58. But the math behind sequence of returns risk doesn't change based on optimism. It's structural. And if you're withdrawing heavily during a down market to cover costs that Medicare would have handled in 10 years, the damage compounds in a way that's very hard to reverse. Here's what makes this especially sharp for people retiring at 55. Fidelity estimates that a 65-year-old retiree will need around $172,500 on average to cover healthcare costs after Medicare kicks in. That's after Medicare. So if your portfolio gets drained covering the decade before Medicare, you arrive at 65 without the reserves you need for the decades after it. You're not just solving for the gap. You're solving for what comes on the other side of the gap. Person B in that scenario didn't get lucky. They structured their withdrawals so that the portfolio had room to recover. They kept a cash buffer for 2 to 3 years of expenses, which meant they didn't have to sell equities at a loss when the market dropped. The portfolio stayed invested long enough to heal. That's the resilience path. Not a prediction, not a guarantee. Just a structure that gives your money the time it needs. If you find this kind of analysis useful, the kind that actually looks at what can go wrong instead of just what you want to hear, hit subscribe. There's more of this coming. So what are the actual tools that let you access your retirement money early legally without handing 10% of it straight to the IRS? Most people who retire at 55 assume they're stuck waiting until 59 and a half to touch their retirement accounts without penalty. That's not entirely true. There are two legal mechanisms that change the math, and if you're seriously planning an early exit, you need to know both of them. The first is the rule of 55. If you leave your job in the calendar year you turn 55 or older, the IRS allows you to take distributions from that employer's 401k without the standard 10% early withdrawal penalty. Not from an IRA, not from a previous employer's plan. Only from the 401k tied to the job you just left. The income tax still applies, but the penalty disappears. For someone sitting on a substantial 401k balance, this is a meaningful runway. The second is 72T distributions, also called SEPP, substantially equal periodic payments. This one applies to IRAs. You set up a schedule of fixed withdrawals calculated by IRS formula. You commit to that schedule for at least 5 years, or until you reach 59 and a half, whichever comes later, and the 10% penalty goes away. It requires discipline. You can't adjust the withdrawals once you start without triggering penalties retroactively. But for someone who needs to bridge income from an IRA before Medicare and Social Security kick in, it's a real option. So between the rule of 55 and 72T, you can potentially access both your 401k and your IRA early without the penalty. The question is how much you pull and in what order. This is where MA management becomes the third tool. MA-J is your modified adjusted gross income, and it determines whether you qualify for ACA subsidies. For 2026, a couple needs to keep their MA-JA below roughly $83,000 to stay within 400% of the federal poverty level and maintain eligibility for premium tax credits. Cross that line even by $1, and the subsidy structure changes significantly. What this means practically: every dollar you pull from a pre-tax 401k or traditional IRA counts as ordinary income and pushes your MA up. Pull too much in a single year, and you lose ACA assistance right when you need it most. The health insurance bill that was $1,400 a month with subsidies can jump to $2,200 without them. So the structure matters. Roth conversions, taxable brokerage withdrawals, and pre-tax retirement distributions each affect your MA differently. A thoughtful withdrawal sequence, not just a withdrawal rate, is what keeps you in the subsidy window and out of the penalty zone. These tools are not loopholes. They are written into the tax code specifically for situations like this. But they only protect you if the overall plan is built around them, not bolted on afterward. Retiring at 55 is not a fantasy, but it does require you to see the full picture, not just the number on your SSA statement. That number assumes you keep working. If you stop at 55, the projection changes. The 0 years go into the formula, the benefit drops, and the retirement plan built around the original estimate starts to crack. That's the phantom benefit. And now you know how to check your real number. The bigger threat is the decade before Medicare. 10 years of private insurance, potentially $240,000 to $288,000 out of the same portfolio you need to last 30 years. That gap doesn't disappear by ignoring it. It gets managed by planning for it, by using the rule of 55-72T distributions and keeping your MAJ in the subsidy window. None of this is about whether you deserve to retire early. After 30 or 35 years, that question answers itself. This is about making sure the financial structure underneath that decision is solid enough to hold. The people who make early retirement work are not the ones with the biggest portfolios. They're the ones who looked at the uncomfortable math before they walked out the door. How are you planning to handle the healthcare gap before 65? Leave a comment below. And if you want to keep building a retirement plan that actually holds up, subscribe to Wes Investor. See you in the next one.